Hello, and welcome to Mindfulness in the Virtual Classroom. My name is Anna Kay, and I'm one of the Behavior Support Specialists with Albuquerque Public Schools. This webinar today is part of our team's webinar series that focuses on supporting teaching in the virtual classroom and learning in the virtual classroom. Today, we're going to be looking at mindfulness specifically and looking at it through the lens of teacher self-care, the importance of teacher self-care, and practical ways to begin integrating mindfulness into your daily routine in order to cultivate a sense of calm and resiliency for you as the teacher, but also a sense of calm and resiliency for your students. We're going to begin our presentation today by looking at a lot of the research that supports mindfulness. The second part of our presentation is going to be dedicated to practical ways to start using mindfulness, practical strategies, both for yourself as the adult, but all of these strategies are appropriate for children and can be used in your classroom. You may be familiar with the name Kabat-Zinn. He's the founder and executive director of the Center for Mindfulness in Massachusetts. He's written several books, extensive research on mindfulness and how it can improve attention, productivity, communication, and resilience. And in his 2003 study, Kabat-Zinn defined mindfulness as the awareness that emerges through paying purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience moment by moment. So when many of us hear the word mindfulness, we may instinctively think of meditation. And while that can be a component of this, the practice itself really encompasses much more. In a greater sense, mindfulness is directing attention to a specific focus, such as the breath, sensation in the body, an experience, a feeling, maybe such as gratitude or kindness, or other attentional anchors. And when we're thinking of attentional anchors, that is something that helps us stay in the moment, something that anchors our focus and our attention to the present. So the intention of mindfulness is not really to get rid of thoughts or feelings, but rather to foster an awareness of moment-to-moment experiences and viewing those experiences with a lens of personal acceptance and kindness. Mindfulness is a practice of being present, of being aware of your body and thoughts in the present moment. And when we practice being intentionally focused, avoid dwelling on those just thoughts around what may happen in the future, or those thoughts around what has happened in the past. And by being more intentionally in the moment, we're able to gradually develop a greater sense of calm and a greater sense of resilience in the face of stressful situations. So we know that teaching is an incredibly stressful profession, and it has become increasingly stressful for many of us amidst the uncertainty in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. And when we're using the word stress today in our discussion around mindfulness, we're talking about the relationship between a teacher's coping resources and the demands of a specific environment or a specific stimuli. So in their study on transactional theory and research on emotions and coping, Lazarus and Folkman explained that when we experience stress, and we experience it when the perceived demands exceed our personal coping resources and skills. So if we're thinking about stress in this way, that means stress is dynamic, right? It can change. And as we develop more coping skills, we can offset the imbalance between the demands of our life and our ability to cope with those demands or cope with that stress. Now, that certainly doesn't mean that stress goes away, that our lives are suddenly void of stress or stressors. That's absolutely unrealistic. However, if we think about stress as being dynamic and as being part of an imbalance in perceived demand and our coping resources, it provides us with some sense of hope that we can develop skills that will help us to manage our own personal levels of stress. And one way to do this is through mindfulness. So there's ample research that shows us that teacher well-being has been shown to link directly to professional performance and student outcomes. And of course, that's important to us, right? We want to do the best at our jobs. But I also want us to think about not only teacher well-being, well-being for us as human beings, and well-being for us in every aspect of our life, not just as teachers. And to me, this brings to mind the adage, right, that you can't pour from an empty cup. We can't give of ourselves in an academic or social emotional sense if we're running on empty. And let's think a little bit about stress relationships. So the defining factor in determining if a stress experience is toxic or tolerable is the presence of caring, supportive relationships. We know that it's imperative that as we begin this school year, right, fall 2020, that we need to begin the year by building strong, supportive, productive relationships with our students. Our goal to thrive academically if they're supported emotionally, and that support comes from strong relationships with their teachers. Research has shown that relationships with emotionally supportive teachers impact students' overall well-being, academic values, interest and engagement in academic tasks, and also sort of general pro-social behaviors. But at the same time, research also tells us that when teachers experience pervasive levels of stress, it can impede their ability to form close, productive, social emotional bonds with their students. So this is really just another testament to the fact that we deeply need to take care of ourselves and our own well-being as teachers so that we're able to support our students. There's also an extensive peer-reviewed body of research that supports the efficacy of mindfulness in the areas of body health, chronic pain, anxiety, depression, and improved interpersonal relationships. In the last 20 years, there have been ample studies looking at mindfulness as a productive tool in the academic setting. So as far as teacher well-being and performance, mindfulness is associated with lower levels of teacher stress, emotional burnout, cynicism, and missed work days. It's also connected to higher levels of efficacy, job satisfaction, and overall job performance. Mindfulness is also shown to improve the regulation of attention and emotion, thereby reducing emotional reactivity. So as a teacher, perhaps if one engages in mindfulness and has practiced sort of regulating their own emotions in stressful situations, if we find ourselves in a position where we're in a stressful situation with a student, with practice on our own personal regulation, we can help to manage our response to that stressful environment or that stressful situation, so that our response is productive and supportive rather than reactive. or emotionally reactive. There's also a great amount of research around mindfulness benefits for students. Mindfulness has proven to positively impact executive functioning, working memory, attention, academic skills, social skills, emotional regulation, and self-esteem. There were other studies where students did self-report, but they saw their improvements in mood, especially in regards to decreased levels of anxiety and stress, and even fatigue. So considering that this is such a unique and critical time for our learners, how are we taking care of our own well-being so that we can show up for them as our best self? Similarly, how are we providing strategies and coping skills for our students so that they can show up as their best, most authentic selves in both an academic and social emotional sense? And of course, one of the ways is through mindfulness practice. So from here, I'm going to look at 7 different mindfulness strategies. These in length, um, most of them can be fit into just maybe 10 seconds or be extended to fit the amount of time that you want to focus on your practice. All of them are designed to support adults, but are also appropriate for our younger learners, kindergarten through 12th grade. So when we're going through these, look at these strategies through 2 lenses. First, as our own, as the adult, and then through a lens of how could I teach this to my students in this virtual setting? So this first strategy is called 2 feet, 1 breath. I personally like to do this before a transition, perhaps now virtual setting before I log into the Google Meet, before I hit that join meeting button. This is something that I like to do. So to engage in 2 feet, 1 breath, either stand up straight or sit with both feet planted firmly on the ground. And as you feel your feet pressed against the ground, notice the sensation in your feet. Also take slow and breaths. And notice both the sensation in your feet pressing against the ground and in your breath cycle. And keep this intentionality and focus for 5 breath cycles. This could be something that you use in your virtual classroom if you are moving to sort of a whole group or small group synchronous activity to an asynchronous activity. So before students leave your instruction and go to work on something on their own, this is a really good transition activity. I particularly like it for transitions because it provides some time to focus your attention on the present moment so that your mind is clear when you move on to this next task or this setting or activity. This next mindfulness activity is a sensory walk. This one's wonderful because it allows you to sort of change your setting and also focus both on your breath and a separate attentional anchor. And that attentional anchor is using one of your 5 senses. So I usually like to use this with my hearing, right? My sense of hearing, and focus on sound as I walk. So as you're going on a sensory walk, this can be outside or even just a couple of laps around your home or through your backyard. And as you're walking, you are focused on 2 elements, your breath, also in this case, the sounds that you hear. I like to use sound because as I'm walking, it provides a rhythmic sound, right? As your feet hit the pavement or hit the sidewalk, there's rhythm there and there's comfort in rhythm. And as you're walking, you might notice how the sound of your feet against the ground change as you move from the sidewalk to gravel, for example. You might notice the buzz of your neighbor's swamp cooler motor and how that gets quieter as you move farther away from their home. And I would venture to guess, perhaps, as we are focused on, for example, that we're going to start to notice sounds that we didn't notice before, right? Different types of birds, maybe different types of traffic noise from different cars. And as we're doing this, naturally, our thoughts are going to drift, right? We might begin to start thinking about this meeting that we have coming up in an hour, or something that happened yesterday that's bothering us. And then, right, there's no need to beat ourselves up about those thoughts entering our focus. But if we notice thoughts that are not focused on the present entering our mind, we just sort of gently push them aside and make sure we return our focus to one of our five senses and our breath. So if we're doing this with students in the virtual setting, right, this isn't do with them. This would be more of an asynchronous task. We would give them the tools to do it independently. And then I would encourage us afterwards to have them share out what the experience was like for them. An important part of mindfulness is really thinking about how our body felt during or after. Maybe talking about, was it easy to keep your focus only on your breath and the sounds you heard? Or was that difficult? Or maybe as students are doing this over time, asking them to notice if it's becoming easier. Or just kind of having them talk about what experiences or feelings arose for them. This next task is mindful eating or mindful drinking. I'm sure many of us can relate to filling your coffee tumbler up at the beginning of the day and finishing it by maybe 10 o'clock as you're doing other things. And then realizing that we never really took time, or I really never took time to taste my coffee, right? I was drinking it sort of mindlessly as I was doing other things. And thinking about ways that we can use times that we're eating or drinking to engage in a mindfulness activity. So if we're thinking about coffee, we might not do this the whole time we're drinking our cup of coffee, for the first 5 sips, really thinking about how this coffee tastes, what taste we notice, what flavor notes, the temperature, how it feels as we swallow, and maybe how our body feels after we've consumed, in this case, some caffeine. Because we are eating and drinking throughout the day, this is kind of an easy way to make sure that we are scheduling mindfulness into our daily routine and making maybe even just the first few bites of food a mindful activity. Now, you can guide students through a mindful eating activity, even virtually. You can ask that every student grab a snack or part of their lunch, and you can guide them through some prompts. Before they start eating, ask them to smell their food and just really notice the smell. Maybe ask them to hold it in their hand or hold the utensil in their hand and notice what that feels like. Then encouraging students to bring their awareness to the tastes and the feeling of that food in their mouth and how it feels as they're chewing or swallowing. And maybe how their body feels after they've eaten. Again, just another strategy to bring our focus to the present, so we don't let those anxious thoughts sort of take us a place where we don't want to go. Seven, eight, breathe. This one's really, in the activity, we have attention that's directed to our breath, but also another attentional anchor, which is counting. So to do 4, 7, 8 breathing, either sit, stand, preferable if your feet are sort of firmly on the floor, so you feel some grounding against the floor. We're going to breathe in and count internally 4 counts as we breathe in. Hold that breath for 7 mental counts, and exhale for 8 counts. And repeat this cycle 5 times. Now, when I used to be a second grade teacher, and when I was teaching second grade, these counts were too long for my kiddos. They didn't have really the lung capacity to hold their breath that long. And so we worked way up numbers, but we started as 4, 5, 6 breathing, where we breathed in for 4, held the breath for 5, and exhaled for 6. And eventually we worked up to 4, 7, 8. So this can be modified either for yourself or your students, however you. This next activity is buddy breathing. This is especially great for our younger learners, where focusing solely on the breath is really challenging. So to engage in buddy breathing, you're gonna lie on your back, somewhere comfortable, maybe a bed or on a rug, and place something soft on your stomach. So that soft thing, that's your buddy, right? It could be a pillow, a towel, or a stuffed animal. And while you're engaging in buddy breathing, you are inhaling slowly and deeply and exhaling slowly and deeply. And as you complete those breath cycles, our focus is on the breath, but also on the visual attention anchor of the soft object in our stomach rising and falling with our breath. And there's another attentional anchor there where there is actually like pressure in our stomach, right? Because something is sitting on top of it. And as we're engaging in buddy breathing, we're just noticing the rise and fall of the object, as well as the sensation in our body as we're taking deep, intentional breaths. This next activity is a moment of gratitude. So in this mindfulness activity, we're directing our attention to an emotion, in this sense, gratitude. So that's really just creating time and space to think about something that you are grateful for, to sort of hold that feeling and that thought, hold space for that. This could be a part of your morning meeting, how you start your day, or perhaps as students are logging into your Google Meet, they know that that's their moment of gratitude. And while they're waiting for their peers, that's a time for them to hold space and think about something that they're grateful for. Now, this can be extended to journaling or even representing that gratitude through artwork, or just a time to hold it for yourself. Another way to integrate moments of gratitude into your daily routine are really pausing for those moments of thank you. We say thank you often throughout the day, and sometimes we say it rather mindlessly, right? It's polite and we're being polite, but maybe thinking of taking that a step further, integrating mindfulness by really pausing and thinking about when we say thank you, what are we grateful for in the moment? Right? If my husband brings me a glass of water, say thank you, even if I'm continuing to work. Maybe taking a moment to pause, be in the present moment, and think, when I said thank you, what am I grateful for in that moment? I'm grateful for clean water. I'm grateful for this vessel that the water is in. I'm grateful that my partner did something kind to me, kind for me. And encouraging students to do this as well, so that we're not mindlessly saying thank you, but there's some intentionality and focus behind those words. And our last activity here is called a sigh of relief. This one's really fun, I think, to do with young kids because they can be kind of loud and dramatic engaging in this. So to use a sigh of relief, you're going to take a really big breath, and as you hail, it's a really loud sigh. And maybe it's a loud sigh and kind of your arms flail. It can be very, very theatrical. And you're going to do 5 sighs of relief. The first one is loud and dramatic and over the top. And by the time we get to the 5th sigh, our sigh is silent. Our body is totally still. So it's that progression from loud to really quiet. And as we're moving through that continuum, through those sighs, thinking about how our body feels differently as our sighs get quieter and our body gets more still. In the virtual setting, right, kids could even turn on their mics for this. I mean, it get loud in the beginning. Um, that might be a little overwhelming for some. It kind of depends on your student population. But then if their mics are on, they can hear by the end that everyone is sighing silently. Again, this could be a good transition activity or even something students are practicing on their own at home or teaching to their family members. And as we continue to think about mindfulness, really thinking about how we can keep this practice going, right? Mindfulness is truly a practice. It is something that is difficult, certainly difficult at first, that we can improve upon. And in order to make our mindfulness practice more meaningful, thinking about how we're prioritizing it, right? How are we scheduling it into our day, either us personally or into our academic day? We can also make sure this practice maintains and continues if we get student input, right? Really encouraging them to have those opportunities to talk about their mindfulness practice, what they notice about their body or their thoughts before, during, or after a mindfulness activity, and just getting their input on which of these strategies maybe works best for them. We can also hand over the power to our students, encouraging them maybe to about times that they used mindfulness at home, right, outside of academic setting, or maybe even creating a class job, the mindfulness leader. So maybe this person during your morning meeting or during your circle at the end of the day, this person gets to choose the mindfulness activity that the class engages in, and they get to lead it. Encouraging our students to have some agency and autonomy and independence in this work helps create buy-in for them, but it gives them a tool, right? They can take into adulthood, a tool that fosters that inner calm and that resiliency. And as we close out, again, my name is Anna Kay. I'm grateful that you joined me for this mindfulness webinar. Again, I'm one of the behavior support specialists with Albuquerque Public Schools. And if you are an APS employee, I encourage you to use the information on this slide to reach out to us as you need. Our website is constantly being updated. We also are pretty active on Twitter. You can follow us that way or email us with any direct questions that you may have. And as we close out, I know I kept mentioning sort of the body of research and literature around mindfulness. These are the articles that I used specifically for this presentation. This is a very short list of a gigantic body of research. But if you're interested and want to learn more about some of the studies that I spoke to today, you have the references there and you can look them up as you see fit. Thank you again for joining us. My hope is that you leave today, and as you leave, you start to carve out time to prioritize your own well-being, your own mental and physical health, so that you can in turn be your best for your students. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.